Atalanta had been running since the day she was born. She knew no stopping, no pausing to consider. She was only forward motion. Indeed, when she first opened her eyes, her first impulse was to run, because she saw she was not in her mother's arms. She was not in her father's care. She was in the clutches of a great bear, a bear that scooped her off the mountain on which she lay and raised her with its cubs. And that is where Atalanta grew, on the mountaintop. And that is where Atalanta learned the wild ways of the mountain, how to hunt with her hands, how to climb, and how to run with all of her being, so that she knew no stopping, no pausing to consider. She was only forward motion. But as Atalanta grew there, she knew there that she was not the same animal kind as her adopted family. Indeed, she was the daughter of a king, the king of Arcadia, in the valley below that mountaintop. A king who, as in so many such stories, wanted a son to grow up to be a prince and then a king in his place. And when he saw that a girl was born to him, he said, "You girls! I don't know what to do with girls. I don't want a girl, I want a boy. Get rid of this girl. Leave her on the mountaintop. Let her perish there." And that is how Atalanta came to be abandoned on the mountain's top. But she did not perish there. She flourished there, growing strong, willful, wild, and free. And when she became woman, she determined that she would return to the kingdom of men and prove herself among them, and she did well at that. And if you have read about Atalanta and her adventures, you know that she traveled with Jason and the Argonauts in quest for the golden fleece, and that she it was with her great spear who first brought down the Caledonian boar, a terrible monster sent by a peeved and angry god. And so it was her fame soon spread far and wide. And when the king learned of the hero Atalanta had become, he said, "That's just what I meant. I made a hero out of her. It was the best thing I ever did. Leave her on that mountaintop. Made a hero out of her." And the king began to think, a heroic daughter's almost as good as a princely son, for I can arrange that she marry one. And so he invited Atalanta to the kingdom of Arcadia. And she came, willingly enough, more out of a sense of curiosity than any feelings of fealty. And the king said, "Daughter, time for you to take a husband, some strapping fellow who will rule in my place when I go." Now, Atalanta had been running since the day she was born. She knew no stopping or pausing to consider. She was only forward motion. But she was a huntress, and she did enjoy the chase. So she said, "Father, my lord, I realize that if I am to remain here in your kingdom, I must obey your rule, but really, any man that seeks to marry me must prove himself worthy of this great kingdom he will inherit. So let us not make it so easy. Let us have a test, a challenge, I know. Let us have a foot race. Along the mountainside I will make the course. Any man who can win a race against me may marry me and inherit this kingdom." And the king thought, well, in stories like this, there's always a dragon to slay or a mountain to cross or something like that. So be it. And so the news was sent out to all the regions thereabout that heroes, princes, and warriors all should come to race for the hand of Atalanta and for the kingdom of Arcadia. Atalanta set the race course along the mountainside on which she had been raised. Now the race began at a lone boulder that stood in a high mountain meadow. That marked the beginning. It set out from there across the mountain meadows and then over a mountain stream, and then the course turned and went up along the side of that stream and on the wet, slippery rocks high to the mountain's peak, and there it turned then again, turning back down through a dark oak grove, opening back out into the open meadow to complete the circuit, and there, marking the end of the race, was the high hunting spear of Atalanta. For you see, the bargain was such as this. Any man who won that race won her hand in marriage, but any man who lost that race, should Atalanta reach the finish before them, she would take her spear and turn it upon them, and they would lose their lives. But proud and arrogant men, heroes and princes from far and wide, assured themselves they were easily going to win against this woman. And so they came, and a great day of celebration was made, and all the kingdom turned out to watch the race for the hand of Atalanta. And each of the heroes, one by one, came and knelt beside her. Everyone watched in great anticipation. The drums rolled, and soon they were off. But Atalanta had been running since the day that she was born. She knew no pausing, no stopping to consider. She was only forward motion. She shot across that meadow like an arrow from a tightly strung bow, easily outdistancing her opponents, leaping across the stream and running up along the side of the stream and the wet rocks at the mountain's peak. Like water herself, she fell upon those rocks high to the mountain's peak, and then there she turned and dove down through the dark oak grove like a gazelle, again staying ahead of each one of her challengers, reaching forward and taking up her spear, turning, watching and waiting, as she saw coming out of the woods, breathless like an animal from the chase. And one by one, each man fell upon her spear, until that place was stained red with heroes' blood. And the king said, "What a mess! What a mess! Heroes are dropping like flies. It's all my daughter's fault. What a mess!" Now in that place, there was a man who knew how to stand still until the lioness would nuzzle beside him and the wild mare might eat from his hand. His name was Hippomenes. He was the keeper of the king's grounds, the orchards, and the horses' stables. And when he watched Atalanta run, he saw in her everything that he loved in the wild world. For she seemed to embody the wind and the fire and the wild rushing water. And as he watched her run, he felt in his heart a sweet, hot pain. And he knew he too must race. And so he came to the king in Atalanta and he said, "Majesties, I wish to run." And the king said, "You fool! Can't you see what happens? Don't you have eyes? Everyone dies. Go, find yourself some soft, supple woman, settle down, have lots of kids, and don't mess with my daughter." But Hippomenes said, "Majesties, it is worth my life to run beside Atalanta, if only for a moment." He would not be dissuaded, and so the course was set again. And soon all the kingdom once more gathered to watch the running, more in a sense of mourning than of celebration. Atalanta stood ready beside the beginnings and watched as Hippomenes stepped up, a strange satchel at his side. They looked at one another, and then they knelt side by side. And for a moment, they breathed as one. Their hearts beat as one. The drums rolled, and they were off. But Atalanta had been running since the day that she was born. She knew no pausing, no stopping to consider. She shot across that meadow like a shooting star, easily outdistancing Hippomenes, leaping across the mountain stream ahead of him, and yet, before he lost sight of her, Hippomenes reached into the satchel at his side and withdrew a golden apple and threw it towards her with all his might. And when she caught it, she stopped running. For the first time in her life, she stopped running to consider what this was that had just fallen in her hand. Here now was a golden apple, so bright and beautifully polished that it reflected the world back to her gaze. For she could see the sky above, the stream beneath, and her own mysterious reflection which she had never regarded before. For this was no ordinary apple. This was the apple of beauty itself, beauty which in all her life of running through the world she had never stopped to see surrounding her. Beauty which now was reflected back to her gaze, and she looked at the beautiful world and she saw the reflection of Hippomenes running on the race ahead of her. Oh, she said, thank you for this gift, but you will not win so easily as that, for I will run my fastest. And fast she did. She ran up along the side of the stream and around the rocks that fed that stream. Like water herself, she fell upon those stones high to the mountain's peak. But again, before he lost sight of her, Hippomenes reached into the satchel at his side and withdrew another golden apple. He threw it towards her, and when she caught it, the first apple came to life, and she stood there on the mountain peak watching the two dancing golden apples, thinking, ha ha ha! What a lovely companion for my first gift. How nicely these two go together. And that is when she saw how all the world goes together. How each like meets with each. For this second apple was the apple of friendship itself. Friendship which in all her lonely life of running Atalanta had never known. And as she stood upon that mountain's peak, feeling the cold wind of a lonely life blow through her, she saw Hippomenes run past her. Ha ha ha, she said. Thank you for this second gift, but you will not win so easily as that, for I shall run my fastest. And fast she did. She dove into that dark oak grove like a gazelle, and now no one could tell who was in the lead. All they could hear was the crashing and the cracking of the branches and the brambles as those two heroes raced towards the finish line. And then they watched as out of the dark woods they saw what they had seen so many times before. Atalanta in the lead, reaching for her red-stained spear, taking it up and making ready to throw. But before she loosed that spear, she stopped at what she saw there. For here now was no animal tired from the chase, but Hippomenes, standing still, a golden apple in his outstretched hand. And Atalanta thought, what manner of man is this? I have never met anyone like him. And then she took careful aim with her spear, and she threw. If Hippomenes had moved even an inch, he would have perished there. The spear passed so close it singed his ear, and then disappeared into the dark woods behind him. And he knew it was not by accident. And so, in gratitude for his life, Hippomenes gave the gift of the third golden apple. And when she caught it, all three apples came alive and fought before her, dancing and enchanting her with their power. An apple of beauty, an apple of friendship, and the third apple which she had to taste. And when she bit into that apple, she felt a sweet hot pain in her heart and a desire for more and more. For this was the apple of love itself. Love which in all her loveless life Atalanta had never tasted. Love which filled her now. Love which lifted her hand toward Hippomenes. And hand in hand, those two heroes raced away from that blood-stained killing ground into a new journey they both filled with beauty, with friendship, and with love. Atalanta and the Golden